Hey everyone, welcome back to our series on the books of the Bible. And today, as we make our way on through the prophets, we make our way to the book of Daniel. And when we look at Daniel, Daniel is kind of an interesting book because while it is a book of prophecy, it also goes in and kind of touches on the historical aspect of what it was like for the Israelites while they lived in this Babylonian captivity. So when we look back to these prophets, we of course have to remember who they're prophesying to and kind of the state of Israel at that time. So when we look at Daniel, we understand that he was a prophet to the southern tribes of Israel, to Judah, while they had already been taken into Babylonian captivity. So when we start looking at this, we realize that Daniel kind of sits in a very interesting place in that he prophesies basically throughout the entirety of the 70-year Babylonian captivity for the Israelites. When you look at the book of Daniel, it's kind of a book of history in a sense. In it, we see a lot of different kings that are over the Israelites while they are in this place of Babylon, while they're in this captivity. We see that there's kind of this constant changing of the guard of people that are supposed to be ruling over. And because of this, Daniel has to gain favor with all sorts of different people. Every time there is a king, it seems like there is something difficult that arises in the life of Daniel, or something where he is going to be put to the test, or the other Israelites that are with him. Now, when we look at Daniel, he was in a slightly different position than the rest of Israel. While the Israelites were held in this captivity, when we go all the way back to the very beginning of the book of Daniel, and in chapter 1, you start to see this introduction of the children of Israel into the land of Babylon. When they get there, it seems like they call out and they're going to go and get a number of the children of Israel to bring, and they are going to be people who are going to serve in the house of the king. Basically, in Nebuchadnezzar's palace or in Nebuchadnezzar's house, he's going to have some of these Israelites that are going to work there. So they go and they look for men that are well-learned, men that are intelligent, men that have various qualities about them. And Daniel is one of these men that are chosen, as well as some others that we'll talk about briefly as we go through this. But in chapter 1, as he is chosen to be a person that is going to work in Nebuchadnezzar's palace, we see that Daniel is going to have to undergo a major cultural change for himself. Throughout the next handful of verses in chapter 1, we're going to see that he is going to have his name changed. He's going to be given a new diet of food. He is going to basically have to face all of these different changes. They're going to change his language, his culture. They're going to train him like the people of Babylon. And we mentioned a second ago that they were going to give him a new diet of food. And while we're not exactly sure, or at least I'm not exactly sure what was wrong with this diet of food for the Israelites, because I don't think it necessarily tells us everything they were going to be eating, we understand that when Daniel looked at this food, he understood that it was contrary to the things that the Jewish people were allowed to eat. If we think back to the book of Leviticus and the beginning of the new law, we understand that the Jews had a specific diet that they were supposed to follow. They had specific things that they could eat and specific things that they could not. And it seems as though the diet of the Babylonians was contrary to that. So Daniel decides in his heart, I am not going to eat these things. I'm not going to defile myself with this. And the people that were over him come and they say, hey, if they come and they realize that you're not eating, they see that you are becoming weak and that you don't have your strength about you because you're basically starving yourself, we're going to get in trouble. So in following this, Daniel places a challenge to them effectively. He says, you feed your people the food that you are used to eating, and me and the Israelites, the people that are Jews, are going to eat what we are supposed to eat. And after 10 days, we're going to look at ourselves, and whoever looks the healthiest, they can continue to eat. So of course, Daniel eats the things that God had commanded him to. And after the end of those 10 days, Daniel is glowing with health. He is stronger than before, and he has obviously been blessed by the Lord. So these people look upon Daniel favorably, and they allow not only him, but all the people that are under their control to eat the things that were fitting for the Jewish people. As we go through this, there are a number of these cultural changes and these historical things that we see as we go throughout the book of Daniel. As we move on, we're going to see in chapter 3, I believe it is, that there is the story of the fiery furnace. And while this is probably one of the most common and well-known stories that we see, one of the first things that we learn when we're in the children's Bible classes is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and their time as they were thrown into the fiery furnace for not bowing down to the idol that had been created by Nebuchadnezzar. And as they stand there, they're thrown into this extremely hot, fiery furnace. And when Nebuchadnezzar looks in, there's a fourth person standing with them, the angel of the Lord. And they are drawn out of this fiery furnace, unsinged, and their hair doesn't even smell like smoke. As we move on, we also see that there is a plot that is brought against Daniel. Effectively, they look for Daniel. They know that he prays, and there is a decree that's put out that they're told that they cannot pray. So Daniel goes and he prays just as he normally would. And when they see Daniel praying, they decree that he is going to be thrown into a lion's den. So he is thrown into this pit filled with lions. And the next morning, the king runs out there and Daniel is still alive. He says the angel of the Lord came and he shut the mouths of the lions. As we look at this, while we understand, and here in a second, we're going to talk about the prophetic aspect of the book of Daniel, we also see that it gives the history of the Israelites' time while they dwelt in Babylonian captivity. It shows these beautiful and amazing stories of the harrowing tales of the faith of the Israelite people, of the faith of Daniel, how he was not willing to bow the knee to the falsehood or the illegal in the eyes of God things that they were supposed to be doing. And how through these things, rather than being put to death or rather than being punished in all of these various ways, he ultimately is rewarded in those. He is able to rise through the ranks and be able to be faithful not only to God, but also he is able to be given these great positions within the Babylonian kingdom. But as we move on, we're going to see that there are various other things in this prophetic aspect. As we go throughout this story, starting in chapter 2, we see that Daniel has a prophetic gift from God. The first one is Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. In chapters 2 and I believe chapter 5, we see that Nebuchadnezzar has these two trees, the first about a statue and the second about a very tall tree. And Daniel is the one who is able to go, and in the case of the first at least, he goes and he tells Nebuchadnezzar the king, as well, or Nebuchadnezzar his dream, as well as giving him the interpretation of it. As we move on, Daniel is the only one that is able to interpret Belshazzar's writing that is upon the wall. And then we see that there are a number of different visions that Daniel has. He has the vision of the four beasts, the vision of the ram and the goats, the vision of the prophecy, or his prophecy of the 70 weeks. As we go through it, this book is kind of a combination. And for the sake of time, we're not going to dive into all of these different prophecies because you could spend a lot of time on them. But I would encourage you to spend some time studying them because they are very beautiful. We are going to look at one here in a second. But the things that we will notice about these dreams and about these prophecies that Daniel is going to bring is that they have a couple of different applications. Most of them have an application for the kingdom that he is living under, for the Babylonian kingdom, as well as some of the kingdoms that are going to follow afterwards. But they also have an eternal and a more godly and spiritual application with reference to the Messiah and that he is going to come to the people. So we're going to look just briefly at the Nebuchadnezzar's dream and Daniel's interpretation of it, of Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue. In this, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream one night and he sees a statue with a head of gold, arms and a chest of silver, a belly and waist of bronze, and then legs of iron going down to feet that are made of iron mingled with clay. And then in this dream, a rock that has not been cut by human hands comes up out of the mountain and it falls onto the feet of this statue, and the whole statue crumbles before it. Now Nebuchadnezzar goes and he asks for someone to interpret this. And of course, all the people that are there, they come and they say, well, we'll interpret it. Tell it to us. But here we start to see some of the wisdom of Nebuchadnezzar, so it seems. He says, if I tell them the story, if I tell them my dream, they'll just be able to make something up. So he says, so that I know that you're actually interpreting my dream, you have to tell me my dream first. And of course, the people that are there are incapable of doing it until Daniel comes up to Nebuchadnezzar. And he tells them and relays to him the dream that he has had. And then he tells him about this. He says, you, O king, are the head of gold. And then there will be another nation that is going to come up behind you that is inferior to you. Another one that is going to come after them, which is the belly and the waist that is going to cover the entire earth, and so on and so forth. Now, when we look at this, looking back throughout history, we can get an understanding and a deeper understanding of what this is. We have the beautiful ability to look back into time. We have the ability that we are now able to look back over history and understand exactly what each of these aspects were referring to. The head of gold obviously referred to the nation and the world power of Babylon. The chest and arms of silver were, of course, the Medo-Persians. The bronze belly and thighs were the Greeks, and then the iron legs were the very strong Roman Empire, which eventually got mingled with other nations before it would ultimately fall. But then he goes on and he explains to them, this stone that you saw that was not cut with human hands, it is not a human institution, it is not a human nation that comes and falls and that crumbles into pieces all the rest and then grows to be something far bigger than any nation. This is the kingdom of God. As we look at this today, we can look back over. We can see that exactly what Daniel prophesied fell exactly into place. That there were these four major world powers that led up to the establishment of the kingdom of God. When we look at Christ coming and him establishing his eternal kingdom, we understand that he did so under the rule of the Roman Empire, while they were this world power overall. All throughout this, there are all of these different prophecies that, as I mentioned already, we're not going to take the time to dive into. But they are beautiful prophecies that show us not only the eventual demise of the Babylonian kingdom, but ultimately the ultimate rise of the eternal heavenly kingdom that will be established in God. What a beautiful thing it is that we can look back into history, that we can see these prophecies that were made hundreds and hundreds of years before Christ is going to return, or Christ is going to come to this world, that tell exactly that Christ is going to come, when he is going to come, and how. I want to leave us with one final passage, and I want us to look into Daniel chapter 6. And we're going to read verses 25 through 27. And here we see King Darius. After we see that Daniel is saved from the lion's den, he makes this proclamation before the people. Starting in verse 25, it says, "Then King Darius wrote, to all peoples, nations and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions." When we look at this man who was previously not, or still not really a Jew, especially not by blood, tells us some very truthful things about our God. He speaks to all people, not just in his nation, but being the king of the world power. He speaks to all nations. He says, "Listen to me, all you people. You should tremble and fear before the God of David." Why? Because he is the one living God. We understand that the God that we serve is the only God, the one who is true and the one who is living still today. He is steadfast. He endures and continues the same forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed. One of the themes that runs throughout the book of Daniel is that all kingdoms that are earthly will eventually fall. The Babylonian kingdom, as strong and as powerful as it was, eventually falls. The Roman Empire, as strong and as worldwide as it seemed to be, eventually fell. But the kingdom that God establishes is not one that can be touched with man's hands, not one that can ever be destroyed, one that is eternal, and that's the kingdom that we are able to belong to today. The book of Daniel is such an amazing book of both history as well as the prophecy that is tied in with it while the Israelites are in this Babylonian captivity. I hope that you have learned something and gained something from this today. And like I said, I hope that you dive into those prophecies that Daniel gives throughout this book, because there's so much for us to learn and so much proof that we can gain that builds upon and shows the accuracy of God's words and the prophecies that come before he even shows his hand. I hope that you will read the book of Daniel, study it more on your own. Thank you guys very much for watching with us. We'll see you next week.